Hello again, YouTube. My name is Bree, and in today's video, I'm going to be doing a painting in gouache. I know I've probably mentioned gouache before. It's a relatively new media to me. I think I did my first paintings in gouache last year, starting with something I did during Mermay, and then kind of didn't do too much with it for the rest of the year, just a couple of things here and there. So one of my goals for 2020 was absolutely to become better with gouache. For those of you who don't know, gouache is kind of a hybrid between watercolor and acrylic. I mean, it's very unique in its own way, but it's able to be used watered down to create those nice, more transparent layers like watercolor, but it can also be used opaquely. Unlike acrylic paint though, gouache does dry matte, and you can also reactivate it. So once you put your paint down and it dries, that's not the end of that layer. If you add water, you can reactivate it and work with it much like it was fresh from the palette. That's not completely true. That's very much an oversimplification, but it really meets basically how I work with watercolor, but at a more opaque level. If you're familiar with poster color, it's very similar. I have not used poster color. That's just my understanding of it so far. In any case, so this month usually would be reserved for ink drawing. If you're watching this later, it's October. And I've challenged myself to complete Inktober for more or less 5 years. This year, though, I really did want to focus on my gouache painting class that I'm taking from Justin Donaldson. So earlier this year, you may recall I took a landscape painting class, and I decided to really commit and try it with gouache. I wasn't really ready. I didn't have enough of the basic understanding of the media to really be effective in that class, and that's completely on me. Justin did an absolutely fantastic job of teaching us the basics where he could, but I felt bad that I was one of the people, kind of dragging him back. But in any case, he decided afterwards to teach a class that was focused on gouache in particular, and I'm taking that now, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm getting a lot out of it. Gouache can be a little frustrating at times. I think it has a pretty steep learning curve, but I'm making progress, so I'm pretty happy. In any case, like I said, normally this month would be focused on ink drawings, but because I was taking the gouache class, I really want to focus my attention there. But then Gouachetober is apparently a thing, so naturally I had to give it a go. For this particular piece, there is a prompt list. At least Justin has a prompt list that's one piece per week. Excuse me. And I didn't really follow it. I'm not great at following prompt lists because I get these ideas in my head where I think my brain just kind of picks up a word and goes, okay, let's do something like this. And then by the time it finishes processing, I've gone off to something else. So the week one prompt was technically organic and inorganic. And it's pretty flexible anyway, but I kind of want to keep with a Halloween theme too. So the skulls are obviously an organic thing, and I wanted to have some sort of sorcery or something going on, which in my brain seemed inorganic. That's a complete stretch. But I also really wanted to try to do some organic shapes, and yeah, so I decided I really wanted to do one of my character drawings because I do a lot of the class tends to geared more towards landscapes and natural objects, we did rocks and clouds and items like that. And as you probably know, I tend to prefer drawing people and birds. So I took this as an opportunity to try something I haven't done in a while, which is to paint a person using gouache. I definitely struggled. It's a completely different beast, and I very quickly found myself zoning out on the lessons we have in class and just kind of going back to what I normally would do, which I guess is more a watercolor approach. So I'm a little sad that I didn't follow my lessons more carefully and apply more, but there are definitely aspects of this that I'm definitely getting out of the class and applying to my gouache painting, just understanding that drying shift and value and just some of the blending techniques. We'll see. I don't know. In any case, I really should have apologized in the beginning. That little sketchbook did not want to stay put, so I apologize because it absolutely kept trying to run away out of frame, and I tried to keep an eye on it, but once I speed up this video, I don't know what it's going to look like. I really should be My computer is really slow, and to even just convert the files to MP4 takes a really, really long time. Like, it runs all night. It's kind of embarrassing. And then editing the footage and then, creating the final outputted video also takes a really long time. So I tend to record the voiceover before I've done that. So we'll see what happens. In any case, I don't know what I'm talking about once again because it's me. But yeah, so I did want to talk a little bit about the materials themselves. For the brushes, I like to use a slightly stiffer brush, but still a watercolor brush. So normally I use the Princeton Neptune brushes for my watercolor paintings, which are a synthetic squirrel hair. But for gouache, I tend to use the Princeton VelvetTouch, which it's a watercolor brush, but it is a little springier, a little stiffer. I don't know what I'm saying. So it still holds enough paint to work with, but it allows me to feel like I'm not damaging my brushes in a tougher media, especially when I'm mixing. I'm using a Stay Wet palette, which I just bought recently, so that's what you see as my palette. It actually has it's kind of like parchment paper. I believe you can use parchment paper when you run out of their special paper, because it is kind of expensive, I think, to buy refills of. Compared to parchment paper is super cheap. But basically, it's a porous paper that allows water to be fed from a sponge underneath it into the paper, and your paints stay wet longer, so you don't have to worry about them drying out. Once again, gouache is rewettable, so it's not really an issue. But being able to see the paint in its natural wet color allows you to explore the value relationships better and really understand what the paint looks like in comparison to the paint you've already put down. Because if you don't know, or you haven't noticed yet, because I've been rambling for 7 minutes, gouache has quite the dry shift. So what that means is that the lighter colors tend to dry a bit darker, and the darker colors tend to dry a bit lighter. And that's one of the parts of gouache that makes the learning curve particularly difficult, is that you have to get used to that and adapt. Until you do, you end up kind of living in a mid-tone hell because everything moves to the center and your values are very flat. In some cases, you end up with something where you think you've put like all these folds in the clothing or something, and everything just becomes completely like the same value. And that's really one of the areas I struggle with quite a bit still, and I'm trying to get better at that. Let's see. Otherwise, the paints themselves, since I already did have a request, and if that person is still listening, thank you. For skin tones, I tend to have convenience colors when I work with watercolors, so I might start with like I just went blank, Naples yellow for that really light base, and then add like a Naples yellow red if I'm working with my schminke, or I might just start going in and adding reds and purples and blues to diversify the skin tones. I usually tend to add browns at the ends, but I mean, that's not how you have to work, that's just how I do it. I find my own little slow building comfort zone. It doesn't work for everyone, and I'm jealous of people who can work much more quickly than I can. But for this one, for the gouache, I'm using Holbein Gouache, and the colors I started with, I believe, are yellow ochre, ultramarine blue, and a flame red, which is just a warm red. In the class, we've been working a lot with limited color palettes, which is something I do want to get better at, because with watercolor, I quickly developed a collection that has so many convenience colors that I didn't really get good at color mixing, and I've been forcing myself to learn color theory so that I get away from the convenience of having so many colors to choose from and really think through the color choices I'm making. For gouache, I've been using kind of a split primary or just the 3-color primary, and in this case, that's the one I started with. Granted, I did add more colors. I think I actually used, I don't know how to pronounce this. I think it's John Brilliant #1, just for the initial wash to kind of get a very base skin tone down when it was still very transparent. And then from there, I basically started mixing my own skin color just because, yeah, I'm trying to learn. And I have a fear with opaque media that if I'm not careful, I'll end up with something that lacks a lot of color. Because with watercolor, you could just do a nice glaze of like red over the skin to add a blush that's very subtle, where I haven't really mastered glazing transparently over opaque paints. I know you can do that, but I'm still not completely great at not reactivating everything underneath. So yeah, I started with something very simple. I also used a lot of white. So for gouache, gouache and poster color both, I'm sure acrylic and maybe even oil are similar. I haven't worked with those mediums to know. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. But the actual paint is very, very vibrant. It's very chromatic, and what that means is that you could get those really saturated colors right out of the tube. What it also means is if you're not careful, you'll be adding a lot more value, or a lot darker values, and way too many saturated colors to your painting, and they might not mesh well. So you have to use a lot of white paint to bring it down to, more natural tones. You can definitely use like a really punchy blue if that's what you're going for, but in general, you just have to plan ahead to mix a lot of white paint in. And I actually bought a 59 milliliter tube of white, and I'm going through it already quite quickly. So yeah, that's definitely a big need if you're starting up with gouache, is white paint. Over time, I did add in some burnt umber. That's another tube I just recently bought, so I haven't used it that much, but just to help deepen up the shadows and also desaturate them a little bit, because burnt umber is pretty good for that. And I did eventually add black. I mean, obviously I put some black in the background, and I think I did some for I don't remember what I did, to kind of help desaturate the garment. For the skull, I'm not happy with how the skull turned out, but I was struggling a bit there and just decided it was time to move on because I had homework, and Gouachetober was just one small thing I should be doing that particular weekend. I think that's part of why I'm so tired right now, is because I don't have time control when I'm painting. I just completely lose track of what I'm doing and give away my whole day. This video actually is much longer than I expected. When I uploaded the clips, I couldn't believe that it was like 5 hours of content, and I actually did a little bit off camera too, so oops. Also, I should have apologized for that at the beginning. Yeah, I did do some things off camera. If you haven't noticed, the sketchbook is really tiny, and I think I mentioned this a while ago. I have another word I can't pronounce, chalazion, in one of my eyes, and while I'm kind of slacking off on getting it surgically removed, it has definitely impacted my astigmatism, so I can't really see as well out of one of my eyes, which makes doing small detail work more difficult. So I did have to sometimes just accept that I needed to turn off the camera and really get a little closer to the image to be able to see what I'm doing, because I wasn't really getting boundaries together. And with gouache, once again, if you touch a wet paintbrush to dry paint, it's going to reactivate it. So you have to be really precise when you're laying down those opaque boundaries, or you'll end up with charging, which is great when you want to charge your gouache, which means basically the waters interact with each other and the paints intermingle in these really cool ways. That was a terrible explanation, I'm sorry. But when you don't want it, and you want those hard edges, like say between skin and a garment, you have to be really cautious. And also just the hair details, I really had to step back and be able to focus on that a little bit more closely than I could with the camera there, because I doubt you want to stare at the back of my head. So I think that's really all I had to say at this point. I know I am rambling a bit. I do that all the time, and you guys don't seem to mind, so you're all awesome. And I think I'm also starting to lose my voice a little, so I will probably stop here. I did originally plan to try to film 4 videos this month, one for each week of Gouachetober, but honestly, I really struggled with my assignment this week, partly because I started late, and partly because we're getting towards the second half of class, or we're in the second half of class, and the assignments are becoming a little bit more challenging for me, and I need to pay more attention. So I don't really know what my plan is for next week besides really focus on my class lesson, but if I have time, I think I'm going to tackle my homework first. I would like to do Gouachetober week 2, which I don't remember what the prompt is, and if I do and I film it, I will post it here if it turns out okay. So in any case, I hope you're all having a wonderful month so far. I know it's still part of a crazy year, but we could pretend that things are okay. If you are participating in any of the October challenges, whether it be Inktober, Drawloween, Gouachetober, anything else, let me know, because it's fun to share challenges with people and help cheer each other on. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video, whenever that is, and I hope you're all well. Bye.